Welcome to this deep dive. Looks like you guys have been digging into some really heady stuff. The social contract, articles, videos, you name it. Seems like you're all really wrestling with this whole idea of agreeing to be governed.
Yeah, and it's a smart move. I mean, the social contract, it's like the bedrock of so much of our political thought, especially when we talk about democracies. But the more you dig into it, the more you realize it's not quite as simple as it sounds on the surface. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's not like we all sat down one day and signed some big official document, right?
Right. Where's the contract? Did we all miss the memo or something?
Exactly. One of the sources you guys sent in, a YouTube video actually, it's called The Social Contract, The Myth of Modern Democracy. It really dives headfirst into this whole problem.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
They use this hilarious example about like a bunch of guys arguing over bananas. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a really clever way to get at this core idea, right? The video argues that, okay, imagine there's no government, no laws, no rules, what they call the state of nature. What do you think?
Oh man, sounds like pure chaos.
Exactly. Total chaos. Everyone just out for themselves, grabbing whatever they can. So to escape that constant struggle, the theory goes, we all agree to give up some of our freedom. In exchange, we get protection, we get order, a functioning society. But the question is, did we really all agree?
Yeah, good point. And the video goes on to talk about these heavy hitters, these big thinkers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, right?
Oh, yeah, the classics.
Mm.
Can't talk about the social contract without them.
And of course, they each had their own take on it. Hobbes, the pessimist of the bunch, thought we absolutely needed a strong leader, like even a king, a monarch, to keep everyone in line.
Right. That's Hobbes's famous Leviathan. Fear of chaos trumps fear of tyranny in his book. But then you've got Locke and Rousseau coming along offering different flavors.
Right, they were more about individual rights and limiting the power of the government.
Exactly. Which, makes sense given how much their ideas influenced stuff like the American and French revolutions.
Huge moments in history. But like the YouTube video asks, even in those moments, did everyone get a say? Like really, truly consent? And this whole idea of a state of nature, isn't it kind of, I don't know, just a thought experiment? Like, how do we really know what life would be like without any kind of rules or social structures?
Yeah, that's one of the big critiques of the whole social contract theory, right? Like, it relies on this idea of the state of nature as the starting point. But is that actually how societies developed? That's a good question to consider.
It is. And even if we accept this idea of state of nature, come on, would everyone really agree to the same terms? Like, imagine everyone sitting down to hash out this contract. Wouldn't exactly be a level playing field, would it?
No way. The power dynamics would be all over the place.
Exactly. Which is where the traditional social contract idea starts to, well, crumble a bit. Especially when you look at, for example, critiques from feminist philosophers like Virginia Held.
Oh, yeah, Held. She brings some really important points to the table.
Okay, but before we get to Held, maybe let's back up a bit. Like, it helps to remember that all these guys, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, they weren't just writing in a vacuum, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, each of them was responding to the events of their time. Like, you take Hobbes, for instance.
Okay.
Dude was writing during the English Civil War. Talk about chaos and violence.
Yeah, I can see why he was all about a strong sovereign to keep things from falling apart.
Exactly. Then you've got Locke coming a few decades later. England's in a different place now, and he's focused on limiting government power, protecting individual liberties.
Makes sense. The historical context matters a lot.
Totally. And then there's Rousseau, writing right before the French Revolution. I mean, can you imagine the turmoil and upheaval?
Yeah, no wonder he was all about popular sovereignty and the general will. Like, the people have the power, not just the king.
Exactly. So each of these guys, they were grappling with the challenges of their time. But here's the thing. Their ideas, they went way beyond their own historical context. They still resonate today.
Yeah, it's wild how ideas from centuries ago are still shaping how we think about politics today.
Right. We're still arguing about the role of government, individual rights versus the collective good. What does it even mean to consent to be governed in a democracy? I mean, all of these questions, they go straight back to those social contract debates.
Okay, so we've got these big thinkers, each with their own spin on the social contract. We've got this idea of the state of nature, which, who knows if it ever actually existed. But like you said, there are some cracks in this foundation, and this is where Virginia Health comes in.
Right. She takes this whole social contract idea and she says, hold on a minute. This is built on a very particular and very limited view of what it means to be human.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. This whole idea of the independent, rational man who enters into this contract, it completely leaves out like the experiences of women, children, anyone who doesn't fit that narrow definition.
Yeah, she's got a point. It's like this model was built with only a small slice of humanity in mind.
Exactly. And she argues that the traditional model gets something else wrong, something really fundamental.
What's that?
Well, this whole assumption that humans are mainly driven by self-interest, like what's in it for me, she says that's just not the whole story.
Okay, so if it's not all about self-interest, then what is it about?
Well, she proposes a different model, a model based on caregiving. Think about like the relationship between a mother and a child. It's not some kind of contract, right?
Right?
It's about this deep interdependence, this responsibility for each other, a commitment to nurturing, to creating a future for someone, even if you don't know what that future will look like.
So instead of always asking, what's in it for me?
Well,
Like the traditional model might suggest.
you start asking different questions.
Yeah, right. It becomes more about, like, how can we create a better future, even if we might not personally live to see it?
Exactly. It's about thinking long term, thinking beyond just your own immediate needs. And this whole idea of different ways of thinking about the social contract, it really comes through when you look at different political ideologies too. Like you sent in that article on libertarianism, for instance. It seems like they're drawing a lot from Locke's
Oh,
ideas.
yeah, big emphasis on individual liberty.
Right. Limited government intervention. The way they see it, the social contract, it's like this very basic agreement. The government's job is to protect individual freedoms, protect property rights, and that's about it.
So basically, in that framework, you have a lot of autonomy. Like, the government can't really tell you what to do.
Exactly. You're free to make your own choices, pursue your own goals. But of course, this contrasts pretty sharply with more collectivist ideologies like socialism or communism.
Right. Those draw a lot of inspiration from Rousseau, the whole idea of the general will, the common good.
Exactly. In those frameworks, you see a much bigger role for the government, like regulating the economy, providing social services, that kind of thing.
The idea being that the government steps in to create a more equitable society, even if that means some limits on individual freedoms.
Exactly. So, your responsibilities to the collective good, they're much bigger in that kind of system. You might be expected to make some personal sacrifices for the benefit of the whole. It's really interesting how these different interpretations of the social contract lead to such vastly different visions of what society should look like.
It's amazing. And it seems like a lot of it comes down to this fundamental question about human nature, right? Like, are we basically self-serving, like Hobbes thought? Or are we capable of genuine care and cooperation, like Held suggests?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer has huge implications for how we organize ourselves,
Yeah.
how we structure our societies. Which actually brings us to another fascinating point. You sent in this report on international climate agreements. And it got me thinking, can we even apply this concept of a social contract to the entire global community?
Oh, wow. That is a really interesting question, especially with issues like climate change, right? We need global cooperation. But how do you create that sense of shared responsibility when there's no global government calling the shots?
Right. Every country has its own interests, its own priorities, and that can make global cooperation really difficult, to say the least. But these challenges, they don't respect national borders. They require a collective response. So
Yeah.
what does a global social contract even look like? What would that even
It
mean?
makes you wonder if maybe Hell's caregiving model could work on that global level, right? Like instead of just focusing on national self-interest, what if we started thinking about our responsibilities to the planet, to future generations?
That would be a huge shift in thinking.
Yeah. Going back to that YouTube video you mentioned earlier, the professor, he makes a really interesting point about how this constant focus on what's in it for me, it can actually make it harder to build a strong, healthy society.
Well, for sure. He argues that it undermines our sense of community, of shared purpose. Like, we forget that we're all in this together. He uses this funny analogy about people who complain about paying taxes. Like, they'll say, why should I pay for someone else's kid to go to school? Or, why should I have to pay for someone else's health care?
Right. It's like they see themselves as totally separate from everyone else, not as part of this interconnected web of relationships. It's all about minimizing their own contributions and maximizing their own personal gains.
And that kind of thinking, it eats away at the very fabric of a just and cooperative society. It creates division, distrust, where people are constantly competing against each other. It's like everyone's trapped in this zero-sum game.
Ugh, that is bleak. But you know what? It makes Held's model even more compelling Maybe if we can shift our focus from individual rights to collective responsibilities, from self-interest to mutual support, we can actually create a better world. It sounds kind of idealistic, but
It's a vision worth striving for. And honestly, these values, empathy, compassion, generosity, a willingness to work together, they're not just some abstract concepts, they're lived realities. You know what I mean?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, think about all the acts of kindness and generosity that happen every single day all over the world. Maybe we need to look at those smaller acts of care as the building blocks for something bigger.
I love that. It's a reminder that these different interpretations of the social contract, they have real-world consequences. They shape our laws, how we distribute resources, how we treat each other.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract theory. It's playing out all around us. So as you keep exploring this, the social contract and all its different interpretations, ask yourself, what kind of social contract do you want to be a part of?
Right. How can we create a world where everyone feels like they belong, where everyone has a chance to thrive? How do we balance individual freedoms with our responsibilities to each other and to the planet?
Man, this deep dive, it's really opened up my eyes to how complex this whole social contract thing is. It's not a simple answer. It's a conversation, an ongoing conversation.
It really is, and it's been so fascinating to explore it with you. What's sticking with you from all of this?
Yeah, it's funny. This whole social contract thing, it's not just some abstract idea, right?
No, not at all.
I mean, it connects to so many of the things we're dealing with right now, today. Like, think about the American Founding Fathers.
Oh, yeah, they were steeped in this stuff.
Totally. Natural rights, the consent of the governed, the Declaration of Independence, right?
Right.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that's straight out of social contract theory.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And this is a big, like the video points out, did everyone really get to consent back then?
That's the question, isn't it?
Right? Women, enslaved people, indigenous populations they really considered equal partners in this whole social contract thing.
Tough question. And it's one that we're still grappling with today,
Yeah.
Systemic inequalities, historical injustices. It's like those cracks in the foundation, they're still there.
Yeah. And that's what makes Held's critique so important, right?
Yeah.
She challenges that narrow view, the independent man thing.
Yeah.
And it opens up this whole other way of thinking about our obligations to each other,
The more compassionate way, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about what we can get from society. It's about what we can give.
It's a big shift.
It is. And you know what it has me thinking about? Like, even the smaller social contracts we negotiate every day, even in our personal relationships.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, like any relationship, right? Friendships, families, romantic partners, there are these unspoken agreements about how we treat each other, what we expect, how we handle conflict.
Right.
And those agreements, sometimes they need to be renegotiated,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like those everyday interactions. They're almost like mini versions of that big social contract idea.
Exactly. And just like in those personal relationships, you need open communication, honesty, a willingness to adapt, to compromise.
For sure.
So maybe that's a big takeaway from all of this. It's not just about understanding these big, heady political theories. It's about bringing that same awareness, that same critical thinking to all of our relationships, all of our interactions.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, building a more just world, a more compassionate world, it starts with each of us, right?
Yeah,
In our everyday lives. Choosing to act with care, with empathy, putting the well-being of others front and center.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today.
Wow. What a journey. We covered a lot of ground. But hopefully, this whole exploration, it's given you a deeper understanding of the social contract, all the different ways of thinking about it, the good, the bad, the messy parts.
Right. And for everyone listening, hopefully this has sparked some new ideas, maybe even inspired you to think a little differently about your own role in all of this, in shaping a more just and compassionate world.
Because ultimately, the social contract, it's not just some theory in a textbook. It's a conversation, an ongoing conversation that we're all a part of.